So there was a problem right from day one. How are we going to analyze it? So if we go with criterion, how do we analyze it? I can tell you now, we haven't really sorted that one out yet. It's not 30 years later. But there are ways now with item response theory, which is a different way of analyzing tests, is actually appropriate in some ways. And it's been shown by people like John to be appropriate. So we're getting there. You still have a bit of work to do. The needs analysis. Even at the time, it was felt that the needs analysis that had been carried out for this exam wasn't thorough enough. And when people burrowed down below the surface, they found that in some cases, they had spoken to one person who was studying medicine. One student. So that was some needs analysis. There wasn't a proper needs analysis done for another 2 years because a test came out, as we mentioned a little bit later, called the TEEP. Tested English for academic purposes. My friend of mine, Sarah Weir, developed that as part of his PhD in 1983. And he did the first proper needs analysis, but at this point, it wasn't very proper. How specific were the domains and how specific could they be is another question. You know, if we talk about medicine, can you get tested English in medicine? And so many subsections in medicine. You have separate tests for all of them. How specific can you get? Sadly, that was one of the things that particularly the exam boards jumped on. Because that meant the solution that was being offered with, say, 6 different subtests was very difficult. You know, let's think of an example. Let's say some of you are going to do medicine, and some of you are going to do law, and some of you are going to do engineering. And I have 3, like a reading for law, reading for engineering, reading for medicine. How do I know they're equivalent? How do I know that my passing point in each of the tests is at the same level? It's very difficult to try to figure that one out.
Couldn't we use analysis? What was
Well, the question was, wouldn't a needs analysis give you an idea of what's appropriate or not? A needs analysis is useful, but it's very good to identify what should be in the test. It might also be very good to tell you what's the minimum level of ability that the person needs to be able to claim that they have enough. But the problem is that they might be different. So the exam board will find that to be a problem because it means that you all could do essentially the same test and have different levels of ability, and you could have a higher level than him. You might fail and he might pass, but your demand is different.
How's that wrong?
It's not wrong.
How's that?
I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah, okay, good.
The problem is that you can't make mass testing. You can't make 100,000 people, 200,000 people, or with like IELTS and TOEFL, you're looking at millions of people. You can't do that anymore because for them, the whole system breaks down. Because the idea that I have, the idea that you obviously have, is of the individualization of assessment. Exam boards can't deal with individualized assessment. They're very good at something, but that's not one thing they can do because they have to look at competition. Otherwise they can't make a test. So that was the problem with it. People call it practicality, but it's the practicality of the mass market, not the practicality of the individual that came to dominate. The last one was profile. And profile has never gone away as a problem. Because testers think, I would say most testers now, certainly academic people who work in testing, really don't like this line in the sand. You know, 1 mark. Because it really doesn't tell us very much. And it's really difficult to justify. It makes an awful lot more sense if I'm making a test that I have a test of 4 skills that I can report on the 4 skills. And then I can tell you something meaningful about it. But for example, to go back to the different areas, the guys doing engineering and the women coming with engineering may not need the same level of English language as people with law. Or they may need very high levels of reading, but they may need relatively low levels of speaking, for example, and writing. So maybe they're receptive or more important than they're productive, whereas the others may be looking at more productive than receptive. Now, a profile will allow us to make those decisions, whereas a single score won't. But how practical is the profile? One of the biggest issues we have always had is this notion of assessment literacy. And as assessment people, we've failed dramatically to teach people, to help people to understand what tests can and cannot do. You know, too many people look at tests as being perfect. A test is something that will allow me to draw a thin line over which students will either move or fail to move. As a tester, I know the line isn't thin at all. It's probably a large gap, actually. And some people fall in there. Now, we don't know whether the people who fell in there should have gone to the other side or not. We don't know, because our tests just are not accurate enough. That's a fact of life. Unfortunately, for the people in the ELTS project, the university administrators were absolutely against profile. They didn't want it. They wanted a line. Pass. They don't care at all about a person's language ability. And certainly in the UK, where I work, if you're an overseas student and you come to my university and I'm an administrator, I need to know two things. One, can you pass the line? Two, have you got a check? Somebody said to me, you know, there is a third, there have to be alive. And I said, well, that's actually optional. Breathing is optional. Number one is actually check, really. But the line is there as well. And that's what administrators do. And in many ways, it's not their fault. It's our fault that we haven't actually educated them. So I think assessment people are the people who are at fault here. It's interesting because with the old TAP was bought by my university when I worked at Reading. And I was asked to completely review the test. And I went back to the original needs analysis and replicated it at the University of Reading in 1999. I found the same results. Right down to the administrator saying no to the profile. And they couldn't, they would not bend. It's just no way. They do not want to make a decision. I even offered to go to all the faculty to establish from each faculty what their profile should be, what they would be looking for. And I would give that to the administration. And the administration then would simply have to say, profile, yes, no. Instead of a straight line in the sand, it's just a sort of jagged line in the sand. No, far too much. One line, one number, yes or no. That's what they want. And I was too stupid and naive, and I agreed. I wouldn't do it now. I'm now older and a lot more stupid and a lot more stubborn. So I would just sit down and bash heads until somebody said, yes, okay, just to get rid of me. I would do that now, I wouldn't have it. So it was my fault. So the TEEP was introduced in 1983, and that was kind of different because it was an integrated. The interesting thing about the TEEP was that there was a reading section, which was assessed. There were questions there. Then there was a listening section when you listened to part of a lecture, and that was assessed. And then there was a writing section when you wrote about the topic, as the same topic went through. So that was a very interesting question. There was no speaking, as you can say, because the British universities in the 1980s decided we don't just speak. Shut up, pay your money, and keep quiet. Fantastic idea. You think about our noisy students these days. Not your place. It was domain specific in that there were two broad areas. But of course, within time, that moved into one broad area. In 1999, I revised the tape and kept the integrated side, introduced a grammar paper. And a lot of people were opposed by the fact that I introduced a grammar paper. And the reason I did it was I realized that the test itself wasn't terribly accurate. No test is. If you look at the IELTS test, for example, the IELTS gives us a band score. If I want to be 95% certain that a student of mine who's reached, say, 6.5 is at 6.5, if I want to be 95% certain, I've got to take 2 steps up. What we call the standard error of measurement, which is the fuzzy area around the score. I've got to take 2 standard error jumps. And the standard error is reported for reading and listening at about 2.5. That means it's half a band down. So if I want to be absolutely certain that a person is at 6.5, they need to give me a score of 7. Interestingly, and I'm not attacking IELTS, but I am going to. Let's face it, that's the great thing about getting grey hair, you can say what you like. They used to have their standard error scores for writing and speaking as well. And when I pointed out to them that 4.8 was a little bit on the big side. In other words, 4.8 or 0.48, sorry, with the band, it meant that to be 95% certain that a person was at 6.5, they might be coming to me with a score of 7.5. If they took it off the website, it doesn't appear the same. But all tests face that problem. With the TEEP, we had double marking, we used many-faceted rash, we used fancy statistics to calculate the final score. We still couldn't get it below a standard error of about 1.25 in terms of an IELTS value. So what we did was introduce a grammar test. So if a student got within 2 standard errors of the score they were meant to, we went to their grammar test to see was there an indication in their level of grammar that they might be at the level. So we took the grammar test, we tested around thousands of people, we got the typical average score, we put 1 standard deviation on top of it, so you were seriously above the average. If you got over that level in your grammar test, your score was automatically up, say, from 6 to 6.5. Because you couldn't be sure that a person who got 6 might actually be at 6.5. So, a matter of fairness. A brilliant idea, if you ask me.